Gotcha. All is well. All right, cool. So I'll start the recording. So anybody who can't attend, be they with work or children or some such, can still learn all of the things. Cool. And then let me just find that PDF that you had sent. Do. And then I believe we have sort of an about me slide. So I will save asking you to introduce yourself until we get to there.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, so I think what we'll do is I'll just go ahead and share my screen.
Okay.
And I'll scroll. Yeah, no problem. And you can just tell me, like, if I'm not picking up on when it's time to move to the next slide, just tell me, Alex, move to the next.
Sorry, Alex. Thank you.
No worries. I got you. I'm here to make things work. That's my job.
Okay. So I guess I'll just start taking it away if everybody's okay with that. Okay, so hi everybody. Thank you for joining today and thank you for your patience through my technical difficulties. So I wanted to talk to you about packaging and from start to finish what the process looks like. So that's going to be kind of the focus of the webinar today. And first I'll get into more about me. So I have been at Rammel Law for almost 11 years. My background's in development and I was a foreign sales agent, and I'll work with our clients mostly in helping them package, develop, and figure out their distribution plan for their content in episodic and in features primarily. We represent mostly producers and financiers, but also a handful of writers and directors. So it's really much more about, because I have a creative background and business, trying to marry the creative and, making sure you're also able to get your money back for the content you spent so much time on. So in the next slide, you'll be able to kind of see, like, these are some of the projects that I've worked on and some of the clients that we represent. We also have a smaller company that we've started recently called Vested Interest, that's owned by Elsa and myself, Elsa Ramo, who's the owner of Ramo Law. And the goal is to really put some more of our like passion projects or more involved projects under that banner. So we recently did a movie called, you got in the next slide, Alex, thank you. We did a movie recently called After Midnight, which premiered in Tribeca last year, as well as Chick Fight, which is in post-production. And I believe Joe Downey might be a Roadmap Writers client. And so he wrote that, and I found him like 4 or 5 years ago and I'm obsessed with him. He's awesome. And so we shot that in Puerto Rico, and January. It stars Malin Ackerman, Alec Baldwin, and Bella Thorne, and it's effectively what it sounds like, Chick Fight. It's Fight Club meets Trainwreck. So that's kind of a bit more about that. And then on the packaging and sales side, just to give you a better sense of some of the things I've worked on, lots of festival-oriented content. So in the next slide, we'll just kind of skip, so this is the packaging and sales basics. So if we go to the next slide, it's what does it mean to package and sell your project, right? There's quite a bit of difference on what it looks like from a film side versus what it looks like on the TV side. So you have to be really careful when packaging. I think sometimes some writers tend to think, oh, it's going to look familiar on both, and it's definitely not. For film, on the packaging side, it's very director and actor heavy. You have financiers that you're focused on funding your content, and you're dealing mostly with production companies. On TV and the packaging side, it's much more showrunner and actor heavy. So, the writers of the content are really tending to be the focal point versus the director on film. Directors, yes, they play a big role, but they take a backseat to what's happening with the showrunner and actors. And then more production companies and studios. When it comes to selling the content on the film side, especially in independent film, you're often more either doing some sort of like early backstop deal to sell to a bigger entity, or you shoot the film and you then sell the post-production or completed version of it to a distributor, right? And a sales agent as well, who they're basically if you don't know, they're basically the people that handle selling your movie to every territory around the world. And then on the TV side, it's much more you're selling on a development phase. There are a handful of times where some people just have the bandwidth and the financing to go and shoot an entire series, and then they can sell it after. One company I can think of that does that is Dean Devlin's company. But that's on the more rare side, and you're much more selling on the pitch and the idea and getting funding from networks to go and make the series and hopefully get picked up and then have it there throughout. So in the next slide, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more of like packaging and selling, right? So packaging kind of before and what I think might happen after Corona, and then packaging really during this stage for however long it lasts, and it's very unclear what that's going to look like at the moment, right? Packaging before and what I think after is much more about finding and creating attachments via your reps, and maybe even cold calls and independent reach outs and relationships that you've built. You know, for on the more completed stage, finding your distributors and sales agents, and again, your reps. Most of the agencies are reps or companies like Synetic, Submarine, and also Blood, Sweat, Honey. Those are other options of reps to help you sell your content. And the average timeline to package and sell a project beforehand is really all over the map. But it can be everything from, you know, a couple months to a couple years. And it's really mostly, in my opinion, packaging and selling. Packaging content is much more about who's your director and your actors from a sales perspective, but then having your backbone of your producer being the one to push it all through. So I think in order to build a good package, having all three, at least like at the very least a producer and director and maybe one cast member that has some sellable value is really what you need to be viable for financiers. And same with on the TV side, it's very helpful to have based on IP or, you know, based on a true story, and then build out the pitch from there. And then again, get that showrunner, production company, and or actor, who many of them own their own companies now, which is really nice because they're much more accessible, I think, to a lot of up and coming filmmakers than they used to be before. You don't always have to deal with you know, waiting for an agent to get back to you. You can sometimes go directly to their executive at their production company, and you'll get a better response and faster timeline, and probably, you know, a more thorough review, candidly. And then there's things about like what might delay packaging and selling, right? A lot of it is you don't have the package where it needs to be, you don't have the script and story where it needs to be, and then also just like people's timelines. I think one of the most frustrating things I've seen that my clients tend to feel is, oh, this takes forever. Oh, this takes forever. We sent the script a month ago. We sent the script 2 months ago. And I get that that's very frustrating, but I think it's just kind of understanding that most of these executives have 20 to 30 more scripts ahead of when yours came in that they have to get through before they can get to yours. So I always say be like the gentle squeaky wheel, right? Be always the kind squeaky wheel who's checking in every couple weeks. I usually like to do like the bi-weekly check-in just to see where they're at. So you're staying on their radar, but you're not getting to the point where they're getting frustrated. I also like to go out to multiple people at the same time. I know a lot of people have questions like, oh, we'll do one at a time, one at a time. I'd say that that's more common when you're making like a formal financial offer to an actor or a director. But if in lieu of that opportunity, I think you should go out to as many people that make sense for it at once, because then you're getting current market feedback of what everybody's thinking of it, and you may get multiple offers that you can pit against each other, hopefully. During Corona, so what's happening right now is that I'm finding much more of the executives are reading. They're at home. They're still active. They're looking. I think that the tricky part is anything that might actually be ready to go, or might actually they would potentially really want to push and greenlight. Those are in a weird holding pattern because nobody knows when you can actually go shoot, right? But when it comes to like deep development or based on IP type content, I'm finding a healthy appetite for that. And also for completed content, those are selling like hotcakes. The things I've seen sell for the pricing that they're selling in the past couple of weeks has been really encouraging, because I think everybody was a little worried about how distributors would be able to take what's happening in the marketplace. And I'd say most of the distributors, there are a couple of boutique ones who might be struggling, but I'd say most of the distributors have a really healthy SVOD, VOD, TV, digital base, that the theatrical that they're losing right now, and maybe even some of the DVD that's kind of becoming dead anyway, isn't as necessary. And so they are actually looking for content because many of their movies can't actually go into production, and they're willing to pay for them at the moment. And then the question is like, besides the completed movies, are they making deals? And that's the big question mark. I think like I haven't seen many things get picked up yet for maybe turning into TV. There's a couple things here and there that are popping up, but it's less. The things that I'm seeing are more consistently, like from a genre perspective, selling right now, is docs or docu-series are still interesting because I think people think there's an easier way to get around that. You usually don't need as big of a crew. You don't need makeup artists typically, those types of things. And then animation, right? Because somebody can always work from home and do that. A lot of actors even have setups in their home to do their animation voiceover at home. And, so that goes with claymation. So those are the things that are doing well, I'd say globally, like after coronavirus, or kind of in what people are interested in is high concept comedies. So what's an easy pitch to sell that's a comedy that you could put a big star in? And, grounded sci-fi, or, maybe not super crazy budget sci-fi. And then action, thriller, and horror, but horror not from a tropey slasher sense, more horror from a Get Out sense, right? It has a bit more of a thought put into it, or maybe a social element is trying to put into the universe. So, if you're going to be doing horror, it's helpful to try and think about they're calling it like more of a highbrow horror version. So that's kind of everything on that slide. So if we go to what to expect when creating attachments and selling, so I think you need to think through your project and really tailor it to what's happening in the marketplace, as well as what type of attachments you should be going for, right? So the big questions are, based upon your content, is this going to be a low budget, a mid budget, a high budget? I would say, if you work at a studio versus if you work at a smaller production company, you probably have different definitions as to what is a low, mid, and high budget. But generally speaking, I think especially in the independent space, a low budget is anything probably below 2-3 million. Mid budget is anywhere between like 3 to 4 to 10-ish million, and a higher budget is really 10 and above. And then obviously like the studios, those would be considered high budgets in the independent space. So talking about like what to prioritize, right? So when you're building your package, okay, so I figured out my budget. Now I need to figure out who the right teams are for my budget, right? Like let's look through who are other producers, production companies. That tends to be my first point of contact that I want to make. I know a lot of the time I got other clients that they say, okay, I have a script, I want to go to this director, or I have a script, I want to go to this actor. And I say, well, it's too early for them. The first thing they're going to ask is, who's your producer, right? So I find that we need to find your backbone of your film, and that is your producer or production company. So in my opinion, you should always prioritize getting the producer or production company at very, very first, and they have to be people who worked in the budget range you're thinking. And sometimes some scripts, they can go into different budget ranges depending on what cast you get. So maybe cast a wider net of who you're going to and see where the interest lies. I get a lot of questions too of people who will say, well, I think it's a $2 million budget. Should I tell the producer that? I tend to say avoid it where you can. Let them tell you what they think the budget is. That way you're not backing yourself into a corner in case they come back and they're like, well, I don't want to do $2 million budgets anymore. I want to do 4. Or, I think 2's too high and I couldn't do it for that. So I tend to say, just kind of say, oh, well, I would like your expertise, or, it would be great I'm kind of open to what this could be, and I love your opinion of what it should be. And then down to the next question. Do you need to make a financial offer for certain attachments? The answer is yes. I know it's really exciting and enticing to try and get that big name actor attached and see if their agent or manager will read it. The percentage of people that actually get an attachment in that way is probably less than 1%. If you have the direct connections to get to their managers from like a friendship space, that can sometimes happen. But I even have friends that represent some of the largest actors out there, and I would not go to them for a project without having a financial offer, because I know they just won't take it as seriously, even though they are my very good friends. But that's where, again, the really nice thing right now is more and more actors and directors are owning their own production companies, and getting access to them and getting through to them is easier, where you can say, okay, I think you could be great to produce this as well as be in it. Or maybe you don't want to be in it, you want to produce it, but you'll help get your other friends doing it. And that is actually what happened with Chick Fight. I brought on the producer, she brought on the director, and the director brought on Malin Ackerman, and she was like, I want to help produce this. So she made a lot of phone calls to her friends and was much more involved in helping bring on other talent. So while she doesn't have her own production company, maybe one day she will, you know, a lot of more actors are getting savvy about taking more of a piece of the pie and being involved more thoroughly. So then when and when not to expose your projects to third parties, I would say be really thoughtful about when that happens, right? Make sure your material is in a very good place. You know, I think it's fine to send it to friends and maybe pay for services to get feedback that is trusted earlier on to help get your project to a good space. And the wonderful thing is you're working with roadmap writers to do that already. I know that they do that very well. But, you know, it's always helpful to have a couple of thoughts from other people too in that regard, just so you can kind of collect the data and get your script to the right place. From there, you know, I think, again, exposing your projects to producers is best, because if you start taking it around to other directors and actors and things like that first, they'll often keep these kinds of submissions on file. And if you submit it again later, if not much has changed, they'll be less interested. If obviously you made a lot of great changes and you've made a lot more attachments, they'll often recircle back. But it's important to be thoughtful about your strategy. And then so just indie selling, emphasis on stars on the poster, right? So really thinking through like, what is, the market has changed so much, especially on the foreign sales side, that it's really for films that are trying to recoup from an independent investment standpoint, it's extremely important to have stars that have sellable power. And I'd say, like, a lot of the time people will tell me, oh, well, what about IMDb? Can I use that as a barometer? And my answer is no, because there's a lot of people on IMDb who end up getting like the #1 for the week on IMDb who really don't have sales value from a worldwide standpoint. So always talking to, you know, bigger agencies, or more specifically foreign sales agents who have a very strong handle in that space on what's going on. If you can get through to them, or you know, even people like me, or having roadmaps set you up with people that are in this type of world, getting that feedback on who's sellable, making sure you're targeting people that will help you push forward, is important. And then so we kind of talked through already the values. I got what the genres are that are selling, so I got ahead of myself. But I'd say think about what's not selling as much too, right? Like historical dramas are a very hard sell. I love them. There's a lot of people out there who will love them. Of course, they get made here and there, but actually selling them and that process of finding the right home tends to take a lot longer than, say, an action thriller. So on the next page, so we're going to go into kind of like the attachments, right? So we touch on this a bit. So the different types are your producers, your production companies. It can be very difficult to know which producer does what. I'd say, like, my husband was looking up a movie the other day, and we've never seen anything like this. There was a movie that had 125 forms of producers on it. So it can get real nowadays in the independent space. And I've been on a couple movies just the past couple of years where there's like 40 types of producers, and some have really brought elements to the table, and some maybe brought like one, or I don't know, they, you know, kind of paid their way into it, or for one reason or the other, they got a credit where they haven't done as much work, right? So it's important when you're talking to producers, or getting a sense of what they're gonna do and help you, especially if you're earlier on, trying to find a producer that's gonna be active versus just attaching their name, right? They're gonna help go to X directors or X actors or X financiers, you know, really talking through like, what are you bringing to the table? I find also a lot of the time people will come to me and say like, oh, well, my producer brought this DP or below the line crew. Well, that's all wonderful from a helping you finance your project standpoint. It doesn't push you over the edge to get the financing, right? What's going to push you over the edge to get the financing is who's your director, who's your talent, and what is the story. and then what is the budget, right? And what does your finance plan look like? So those are the big things. So then financiers, where are you getting your funding and how much are you expecting? What are you offering, right? So where you're getting your funding is really tricky. There's a lot of different types of financing out there. There's tax incentive investors who only do tax incentives, and that's some of the easiest money to get back. So it's usually the easiest to find. There's companies that will do equity. Those are the harder ones to find. And then there's angel investors, which typically means they haven't really done many movies before or never or any before, and they came in because they really like you or were introduced to you directly, and so they're going to kind of come in and be your support. There's debt and gap investors, and so those are people who have basically they put in money against pre-sales a lot of the time, right? So they may say, okay, you sold a movie to Australia for 10 grand, I'll front you 8 for that. Or they may say, okay, you have sales showing, you have a sales agent who I trust and I've seen do really good sales before. And I think that they've told me they're going to sell $1 million. So I'm going to give you 800 or 900. It's like 80 to 95% of the dollar, depending on who you're dealing with. It's probably more like 80. Tax incentive might be higher, but it's lower on this side. So I'll give you like 800 grand to, against that, like those estimates that they gave, because I think they'll hit them and I trust them. So there's a lot of different types, and it's kind of like playing the game of putting your finance plan together to see what other investors and how to access these other points, right? And then obviously directors, and I always say they're kind of like the heart of the film. Like if the producer's your backbone, the director's your heart, and the writer is the brain, right? I think that those are the people that you really need to really care about the project or in it for the long haul. And you may need to make them an offer, you may not, depending on how well known they are. Sometimes you, the writer, may want to be the director as well, and so that's important to kind of understand the hurdles and or ways you need to frame your pitch based upon that. I often say if you're going to be like a first-time director from a project you wrote, you need to have a director statement ready. You need to have all the reasons as to why this makes sense for you to direct it. You need to have the ability to say, like, look, because some people will say, okay, well, I'm open to you directing it, but what if somebody comes in with $3 million and says, I'll give you 3, but I don't want this person to direct it because they haven't directed before. I think you have to let yourself know that you need to be open to those types of opportunities still, and let the other producer know that that's okay too, because hopefully if that $3 million movie gets made, it gives you that much more of an edge to get your directing gig on the next round, right? Because you have more content out there. And then the talent, identifying which roles are best suited for targeting talent. It's usually the lead role for at least your big one. There are sometimes where, and I'm sure you'll see this a lot with like Bruce Willis movies or things like that, right? Nick Cage movies, getting the lead role, getting that name to sell. Sometimes you can get people where they may be like a day player and you pay them a bunch of money to come on set for like 3 days. But if you can guarantee that they'll be in like 25% of the movie, then it's worth it, right? Because that helps you get that bigger sale. And this is, again, where talking to sales agents is really important because they'll be able to talk you through that more. Below the line, that's where I tend to say the below the line really should be more in the pre-production stage. Pitching them and everything isn't gonna help you get your movie into production from a financing standpoint. It'll obviously help you get into production from, you literally need them because they help make the movie, and without them you cannot. But when it comes to pitching and what you're putting in your deck and things like that, unless you're getting Hans Zimmer on your movie, like there's very few people that actually have that type of value from a below the line standpoint. So who should be attached, and when touching on this a little bit more detail. So we start with producers and production companies. If you can, then go to your financiers and investors, or what I'd like to do is say, like, kind of layer it, right? So get your producer and your production company. If you can, as a next step, maybe you get your director, or maybe you get some financing, but maybe I like to say, okay, let's try and get 10 to 20 to 30% of your financing rates, right? Because then you can go to a director and say, oh, well, we've raised some development funds. you can maybe make them an offer with some of those development funds, where I call it a development fee, right? To attach them, they get 20 grand or something like that, but it's not a full pay or play. So you're saving money and you're being a little risky, but not too risky. And maybe then you get your director, okay, let's go raise maybe up to 50% of my financing now because I have this. And then at that point, you can really build out a financial plan and hopefully continue to climb that ladder, right? And some ways to attract investors, right, is build business plans outlining the budget if you can. Again, I know there can be some fluctuation, so you just need to kind of talk with your producer about where you're at in the process. Estimates and kind of show what the profit and returns could be. Sophisticated investors will be able to see through most of your profit and returns. And I always say, you know, it's good to have comparables in your content, but be very careful about how you're putting your comparables. A lot of comparables, I've seen people, there's two different types of comparables, and I don't think it's stressed enough how important this is. There's creative comparables of this is what I want my movie to be like, and there's business comparables, which is this movie made this much money, it's kind of like my movie, and therefore I think my movie will be as successful, if not more, right? Creative comparables sometimes can be 20, 30, even 4 to 5 years old. A lot of the time you'll get like business comparables where they're referencing a movie that's 10 years old, and that movie can never do the same as it in today's marketplace. So I tend to say if you're doing business comparables, try to use movies that are from the past 2 to 3 years at the latest, because that'll help the investors see like, okay, this is a fresh take on what's happening in the marketplace, and you're not showing and dating yourself by putting an amazing movie from 30 years ago, but it would never do the same in today's world, right? And then obviously having a sellable package with attractive attachments. We talked through directors maybe needing a financial offer. Talent, we talked about maybe holding off, especially if you're going to A-list, until you're ready to make a financial offer or they have their own production company. So then the next slide, so what warrants a good attachment? So it helps move the project forward, right? It attracts buyers and other talent. It has connections, an established name, history of success. And the problem with the market, especially right now, like the market hasn't ever changed as much as it is now so quickly. So it's constantly changing. And so the history of success, I would say, you know, again, this is where you're, okay, they had a history of success of a movie from 20 years ago, but we really need to think about what they mean for today. There's a lot of actors out there who don't have the same value today that they did even 4 or 5 years ago. So making sure that the history of success is valid for what's happening in today's marketplace. And then obviously that's all dependent on the budget level, right? Some actors may only mean worldwide 300 to 400 grand, which is fine if you're doing a movie for 200 to 500 grand, right? But if you're attaching an actor that means 400 to 500 grand for a $4 or $5 million movie, you're not doing yourself any justice there. You're going to hit a lot of walls. And that's probably what I'm going to be talking about in my next slide. What warrants a bad attachment? So no name recognizability, right? I get a lot of people that come to me and they're like, oh, I have this package and we got this actor. And I'm like, I've never heard of that actor. Doesn't help. So, you know, you got to make sure they have some name recognizability. Their past projects haven't like totally flopped, or if they have, they still have that star quality like an Angelina Jolie where it doesn't matter, right? I also say be very careful, because I think especially in the past like year or two, people are becoming more and more cognizant of how people treat each other, which is great. So, you know, are they impeding the project in some way? I had a movie that I did recently where we had paid an actor and she did not want to come to set. So she kept pretending to be sick, and they had to send a doctor to tell her she was not sick. And it was like a whole thing. And so like that entire set was like, we will never work with this actress again. And that obviously it hurts production, right? You don't get the shots you need. You don't get, you know, the probably performance you want. So, you know, making sure you're doing your due diligence on, okay, we got this name, but are they going to show up to set? Are they going to do their job? Do they actually care about the project, or are they just trying to get a payday? Those are all important factors to think about. And then even also like, right, like from a safety issue, like, have they been in jail before? Have they strangled somebody at a Sundance party. Those are all, that's happened, right? Those are all things that are important because even from there's a lot of distributors now that are putting in clauses in their deals for a film where they're saying, okay, we are going to want X actor or actress to do 2 to 3 days of press, right? And before we release the movie, if anything comes out about them being, having done something really horrible and offensive, and it affects our ability to sell, we don't have to pay you all the money, right? So that's also the thing that you have to be super careful of. You're kind of relying on these actors to behave themselves. And really, I mean, pretty much anybody you work with on the set, for the most part, to behave themselves so that you have a quality and, I guess you could say like above the line movie, right? Like a courteous set. And then projects that don't incentivize other important attachments or buyers, pretty obvious, right? So on the next slide, making connections to more easily package and sell your projects, kind of dig into that. So the basics of making and maintaining connections to me is one of the key issues when taking on content and trying to push your projects, right? So networking via mutual connections through parties, conferences, festivals, markets, try it all. I know financially that may not always be a possibility, but that's where companies like Roadmap Writers, again, can be very helpful. I've met a lot of people through Joey over the years that I have built wonderful connections with, and I'm grateful for. And so I think that use the tools that you have kind of in your toolbox to do what you can do. And the cool thing with what's happening right now for everybody, right, is you can really take advantage of the fact that everybody's at home and nobody can go anywhere. So, even like the Cannes Film Festival market is going to be, I think it's from June 22nd to the 26th. And it's significantly less to buy a badge for that than it would be to go there. And obviously you're not having to pay for stay and all that stuff. I think they're doing an early bird rate of like 95 euros, where if you buy a badge, you can then attend the market and do like video chats and things like that. What's hard to tell is how effective this will actually be. But even if you meet 1 to 3 people, or, you never know where those connections can take you. And it's a significantly more cost-effective version than attending the markets. And so there's a lot more things like that are also happening where people are trying to do more virtual connecting. So take advantage of it. And then really thinking through, right, like where have your connection points been? People you previously worked with, submitted projects to, that you wish you met but haven't had the opportunity to work with. Always make sure you're staying and connecting. We have a PR person, and the best thing he's ever said to me was through like research, they have done, they found that in order to stay on somebody's mind, you have to connect with them, or they have to have seen your name, or they have to have like thought about you 8 times in a year, right? So when you like kind of calculate that out, like you have to, for the connections you want to keep in your life and have them think of you, or maybe you want to be a writer for hire, or maybe, you want to continue to like meet more people and make them think about investing in your movie or whatever it is. You have to ping them 8 times a year, or have them read a script, or whatever it is. Make sure they're thinking about you at least that much. So on the next page, connections with producers, financiers, and agencies. So their connections, right? Like producers and financiers, maintaining those is super duper important, and making them feel involved. I find like I've run investors to projects where the producers have not done a good job of making the financiers feel involved, or they've really just downplayed like, oh, you only put in this much money, you're not worth it. It's like, well, you don't know, maybe the next movie this person would have put in 500 or $1 million or whatever, right? Don't ever make sure that if you get a movie done, you're really connecting with the financiers, other producers, agencies, and making them feel like, let them know that you're thankful for their help and that you want to continue to work together. If you don't, they will either forget or just move on to other things. And then what's really important is making sure you know what type of project they're looking for, right? Don't send a sci-fi project to a company that only wants to do comedies. So doing your research on, okay, what are people putting, what movies have they done in the past? What are they doing coming up? Have they talked recently in an article or anything like that about what they're looking for, their mandate? Can I do some research? Because I have a friend who worked with not Lionsgate, and maybe that friend knows what they're looking to do now, because mandates tend to change historically every 3 to 6 months. That again is constantly shifting now and probably changing faster and faster, but usually every 3 to 6 months. So getting an update on what they're looking for pretty consistently is important. And then agencies, I know a lot of writers, even producers, directors, they're always looking for, agencies, management companies to work with them. So, if you're going to markets or festivals, that's a really good place, I'd say, to casually, like if you're at a party or things like that, try and meet people, and you'll be surprised like how many you can run into there, because they have to be out and about networking a lot. And even at screenings, I tend to talk to people in line at screenings and made some good friends that way. I'd also say, like, if you get passes from people, right, where you can, trying to get reasons people have passed is important. Because that can tell you, like, oh, maybe certain things in the script aren't working, or maybe I'm learning consistently that this type of company doesn't have the bandwidth, so maybe I need to find out more up and coming companies. Those are important feedback points to process and try and learn from. And then agencies too, when you're working with them, I'd say, like, the big thing to know is I find managers to be more like global view of what you should be looking like, of how to work with you and what to push you for. And agencies tend to be like very hyper-focused, specific, and giving them, like one job, I find is the most effective way, because if you give them a lot, they have so much going on. It's not that they can't handle it, right? It's just that they have so much going on that if you give them like one thing, like, I just need to go to this one person, I just need you to do this one thing for me. It's much easier than like, oh, well, I want to package my project. They're going to just like glaze over. Like, I don't, now I have to read the script and have a thought. Like, don't make me have all those things. Tell me who you want to go to, kind of a thing. So on the next page, connections with distributors and sales agents. I think that this gets downplayed a lot, right? Like, developing relationships with distributors and sales agents and what they can really do for you doesn't happen quite enough, in my opinion. Distributors are the ones who ultimately pay the most for your movie, hopefully, right? To sell it and to give it back to investors so you can go make your next one. So developing relationships with them is very important. They'll also often be able to do backstop deals, right, where they might buy a movie before you've made it to help you get the rest of your funding. They'll be able to tell you what they're looking for. Sometimes I've seen certain distributors that also they'll commission writers they've worked with recently on movies because they like them, and then they'll be able to fund that, or they'll, bring in other producers to fund it while they put up a backstop deal. So, don't undervalue your distributor connections. And they're always looking, they're always wanting to find new up and coming talent, and they're always really, they often don't get as much connection with the actual talent, except for maybe with the PR process. But other than that, there's limited touch points for them in that regard, and helping bridge that gap, I think, is important from a learning process for creatives, as well as, being able to go work with them hopefully again and again and again. Chick Fight's a perfect example, right? Like, we have a client that had worked with Quiver before, and so they had pre-sold the whole movie to them for the world just because of their relationship, and then they liked the script. So just having those relationships can really help. Again, here's same point, right? Like, know what they're looking for, keeping updated on what they're looking for, and knowing what kind of deals they tend to offer with the movie you want to make, right? A lot of companies like Netflix doesn't really want to do theatrical a lot, right? They'll do it here and there if it's something that they really think is warranted now, and especially during COVID, like, no theatricals happening. But when it all starts to come back, you have to kind of know, like, what are their main platforms and how are they doing it? So also knowing what else they expect, right? Like a Netflix, they don't really give any more money off of whatever they're paying for their license. They usually pay, like, the rule of thumb is like 1.3, right? Of what budget should be, kind of a thing. But you'll never see another dime. Other companies have a tendency to do like, okay, maybe they'll do a lower minimum guarantee or a lower license fee, but they you'll have a chance at more money potentially if the movie really hits. So, you have to weigh like the risk and reward of that, and the fees that they take percentage wise, right? A lot of them take fees between like 25 to 50% depending on the platform. What kind of marketing strategies they're going to do in their marketing costs, what territories they're taking, and how long they're taking the film for. A lot of companies right now are trying to take more rights, right? Like they're wanting to say, okay, I want your movie, but I also want any prequels, sequels you might decide to do, any podcasts you might decide to do. I want to maybe like take any money you might get from festivals. So you have to be really thoughtful when doing deals about what rights you're giving them and why, and if the offer that they're giving you warrants that. And same with like the term. A lot of clients recently, strangely enough, have come to me saying, well, they want like this movie for 8 years. That's a really long time. And I'm like, well, yeah, it is a really long time, but it's very common in this industry. And if you look at like a lot of Universal deals can last like for 25 to 30 years. Germany, for example, tends to only buy movies for at least 25 years. So I'd say most distributors will take movies for at least 5 years, and that's on the very low end, up to 25, 30, sometimes in perpetuity, depending on what they're offering for it. Licenses are very different, right? Like Netflix might only want to license your movie for a couple of years, or same with Stars or Showtime. That means they're like kind of a piece of the puzzle. So they will take it for 2 years to put on their platform, and then you may be able to do like a second window somewhere else or things like that. So licenses are a bit different. They're shorter. But if you're talking about like a distribution company who's taking all rights and really helping you push it, they are a longer term. So then the next slide, connections with other industry executives is also very important. So building your connections with managers, again, below the line, and kind of just seeing how it'll take you. You never really know too, right? Like casting directors, I have a lot of casting directors now who also want to produce. And that can be very helpful because they're the ones who typically know what to pick certain cast members, and how to get to them. So, there are a lot of below the line relationships where they want to do other things that can be helpful too. So just building your Rolodex. So next slide, packaging your project, and on to the next. So distinguish your project from everyone else's, right? So here's some stats, and I'm not gonna like dive in too deep on everything, but an estimated 814 films went into production in 2019. 532 were original scripted shows in 2019, were on broadcast, pay TV, and online. So emphasize why your project is well suited for the current market, and going through these types of things. Okay, so I see like a lot of these were in the, $1 to $15 million budget range. So maybe I need to stick within that, or I really want to stand out from that. And I think I have a good package I can do for under 1 million. So let me try and focus on that, right? So these types of statistics to look up can be helpful. So on the next slide, here's kind of like a quick way to get people excited for your project in 30 seconds or less, right? Be succinct and impactful with your logline and concept, right? Like I said with Chick-fil-A, right? Like whenever I talk to anybody, they immediately understood when I said train wreck meets Fight Club. It's pretty clear, easy pitch, and it takes me 1.5 seconds to say. So try and come up with something super easy that people can get right away. It doesn't necessarily have to be a movie reference, but something super easy and quick. And so here's just kind of like some examples, right, of that can get you, okay, like here's the interesting concept, here's why. Is it true story? We usually like to talk about that. Is it based on IP? We usually want to talk about that. And just getting it out there as polished as possible. So the next slide, digging into the 30 seconds or less part, right? So true story, based on IP, and are there any attachments? That's what people want to know in the first 30 seconds you're talking to them about it, right? If there are, who are they? If there aren't, I tend to say like, you know what, it's a clean script And we're really excited about finding the right home for it, and who's going to help us push it forward from there, right? That way it's kind of, I don't ever like to say there's no attachments. I like to say it's a clean script. It's clean, right? We haven't muddied the waters. Help me get it all cooked. So that's kind of, kind of my thoughts on the 30 seconds thing. And then the next slide, again, we've touched on this, but know your audience. What attachments would attract your target audience, how they differ, and what the age demographic is. A lot of my clients make very niche specific projects, and some of them try and be more broad. So, kind of knowing while you're going through, okay, this is the type of script I've written, how do I hit that demographic, and how do I find where that demographic's been released to backtrack to who's produced it, right? So if you're making a smart horror movie, okay, let me go look at the horror film festivals. There's Citrus, that have done well and get good distribution, right? There's Citrus, there's Toronto After Dark, there's Sundance Midnight Section, right? Like you go through those and you say, oh, look at all these producers that did these. Let me backtrack and see if any of them are looking for something like this. Maybe I'll be able to find what their budgets were so I can know, right? Like some of the movies that play at Sundance are very big budgets on the genre side. Some of them were made for 200 grand. So you can't always find that information because not everybody puts it out there, but you can get a sense when you're backtracking of, okay, this producer's done one movie that he got into Sundance. He probably did it for a lower budget. Maybe I should contact him, right? So do a lot of the backtracking where you can. And then what attachments would attract your target buyers, right? So there's some actors that do really well in genre movies, and then when you try and transfer them over to comedy, it's kind of a struggle, right? They're really good action, but maybe they're really good action for a reason. Maybe they can't do that comedy as well, and vice versa, right? So really think through like who's sellable for your genre as well, not just your budget. Okay, so on to selling your project. So raising publicity, right, is important. I always say you have to be really careful and thoughtful about how you're doing it, and hiring a PR company is usually one of the best steps for you, because they tend to have a better sense of like, when is the right timing to take something out, why, maybe you need to wait till you get your distributor to make sure that you're not driving the car off the lot and now it immediately depreciates because you've driven the car off the lot, right? You have to really think through all of that, and having a PR team or talking to sales agents and other, execs at distribution companies where you can help you navigate that. Film festivals and markets are obviously great publicity tools for you, even for stuff that you have like in pre-production, right? Like being able to build awareness on what's going on with your project, what's going on with you as an individual, go to screenings and the press that can come out of that for completed content can be very, very helpful, especially for the top festivals. There is a very big difference between what a Sundance or a Tribeca means versus, I'm not going to give a specific name because I do not want to put anybody down, but versus maybe a smaller festival in like a very small state that we'd have never heard of, right? I get a lot of people that come to me and they're like, oh, well, our film won 10 awards at these 10 festivals. I'm like, well, I've never heard of these 10 festivals. So distributors it just doesn't move the needle for them. The ones that move in the needle for them, just in case you're curious, right, is Sundance. Then there's Berlin, South by Southwest, Tribeca, sometimes maybe on the smaller side, like a Newport and a Santa Barbara. Cannes, Fantasia more for genre, Fantastic more for genre, Citrus more for genre, Telluride, Venice, Toronto, and sometimes maybe on the smaller side, like an Austin Film Festival. Though, and Slamdance on the smaller side too. So those tend to be, there's not many, right? Like when you think about the hundreds of film festivals that are out there, there's really only like 15 that have actual value for you as a sales tool. Outside of that, play where you want, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to help you with sales. Social media. So this is where I think social media is really important. And a lot of distributors, if you have names that have followers in your content, they're going to really care about how they're able to post and do the social media. I sound really old, do the social media. But that's going to be an important piece. And I think when and how you use it, you have to be really strategic, and having like a marketing person, or again, like your PR person, walk you through that, because you don't want to give too much away too soon. You want to do it at the right time. You want to make sure it's effective, and that you don't use the 3 times that this star said that they would post about it on something like 6 months before the movie's released, right? So I'd say, you know, it's more and more common for distributors to want that and to expect it. And so when you're doing deals earlier on, it's important to have that thought, but also know that you have to be really careful about how and when you use them. Okay, so the next slide. So raising publicity. So, you know, like this is where your PR person will be better than me to dig into it, but customizable campaigns. I'd say a lot of the time too, when you're targeting your movie, again, knowing how to hit them is important. I had a client a couple of years ago now who had a faith-based Alcoholics Anonymous movie where she, before we even went to distributors, she went to 200 churches and got all of them to agree to buy 1,000 tickets to the movie when it came out in their hometown. So she was able to walk that into a distributor, which they were like shocked, and say like, we've already got your audience who's agreed to pay for these tickets. Think about all the other things and ways you can do this, right? Help them think about their campaign and how to reach your niche audience for your content. And if you can grow out from there, amazing. But if you can help them start the big thought, I find it's more effective than just like throwing things at them, because they get a lot of stuff thrown at them. So this is just kind of examples of ways to do that, right? Go to where your audience is, reach out to individuals relevant to your topic, see how they can talk about it and ways that they can be involved and be helpful. So the next slide, just going to talk a little bit about the difference between distributors versus sales agents, as well as I'm going to also talk about sales agents versus sales reps. Distributors are the person who's taking your movie and putting it out through the platforms, right? So they're putting it on digital, on SVOD, maybe through a Netflix or something. Sometimes it means they'll work with other distributors, but they're the ones coordinating getting it out. DVD, non-theatrical, meaning ships, rigs, educational rights, prisons, even maybe festivals, those types of things. The sales agents, they're the ones who represent usually foreign only. Sometimes they will also represent domestic. If they do, it should be at a much lower fee. But they're the ones who take a movie and sell it to every territory around the world who has their own version of a Lionsgate or Universal or other specialty distributors like the A24s of the world, right, in those countries. And so examples of distributors would be like an A24, Gravitas, Dean Magnolia. Examples of a foreign sales agent would be an XYZ, Solution, Exchange, that kind of thing. The difference between a sales agent and a sales rep. So a sales agent is somebody who, again, does the foreign. A sales rep is more like a CAA, Endeavor Content, UTA, Submarine, Cinetic. They're the ones who are going to take it and mostly focus on selling your movie domestically. They'll usually take something like a 10% fee, maybe a little less. And they're the ones they're hyper focused on how do we get you the most money out of the US, maybe even Canada. And that's a really important distinction because, sorry, you can keep scrolling. I'm just talking while you're scrolling. That's a really important distinction because a lot of the time people will say, well, I want a sales agent. And I'm like, well, do you want a sales agent or a sales rep? Because they do very different things. And it's important to make sure you're clear about that, or it can kind of confuse the process. So know what you're looking for in a deal. Theatrical versus digital versus physical. What is important for your movie and where is it going to find its best home? I'd say most movies now that are done independently, they make most of their money off of like some sort of SVOD type platform, a VOD type platform in digital, right? Physical's dwindling, theatrical's really only for specialty films or wide releases. You know, the timeline for distribution, like we talked about, what rights are you okay with giving the distributor, like we talked about, the percentage of profits going to your distributor, you have to really think about that because a lot of the time they'll add in extra fees, and this is where like it's important to have a lawyer or somebody who's done a lot of these deals before to kind of talk you through. Like a lot of my clients get surprised, like, oh, I didn't realize that SAG takes a residual reserve that's before anybody else. And like, yeah, it's just how it goes. But you have to know that going into it, so that way you're prepared and you can talk your investors through it when that time comes. And so other things too is like some distributors will take their percentage, their fees, and then even a back end, right? I don't like giving a back end where if I don't have to, but you have to be thoughtful of that. Some distributors or sales agents will try and take a premium, anywhere between like 2 to 3 to 15%, which 15% is egregious, on money that they fronted to you. So if they give you a minimum guarantee, they'll try and take a premium on that sometimes. And it's rare, but it happens. And sometimes it's worth it, sometimes it's not. So you have to think through that as well. And so what are they offering to do versus asking you to do independently? That's kind of what we were talking about, right? Like a lot of them want their filmmakers to be more involved, and okay, if you're going to be more involved, that might be okay with you, but what are they going to do to make all of their fees worth it as well? So the next slide, so sales and packaging resources outside the traditional management agency model, right? Like, again, I know I sound like I'm just praising here, but like that's where you have access to people like Roadmap. There are other people like me out there that do this type of thing, where if you do your research and see like who's doing, who might be like here and there teaching at universities, who's been very involved at the industry level, or maybe even like I know a couple of festival programmers or people that work at festivals where they're also producers. I think those are the types of people that are really good because they're seeing a ton of content. They know what's working and what's not working. They have access to all of those producers. They often have access to a lot of the directors as well. And I think they tend to be a bit overlooked, actually. And so then what resources are available to you? Make use of your individual and independent resources. What connections do you already have and how do you get through? Again, like there's people like us, and making sure that everybody kind of plays off each other, right? Like you may end up having a manager or an agent and they're hyper focused on like 1 or 2 of these projects. Okay, well, maybe you should start focusing on this other one that's been a passion project of yours, and how do you push it out there? Don't just sit on your representation and expect them to do everything, because they just can't. And so if you're able to also push, it not only shows your initiative, and they're very grateful for that a lot of the time, but it also means that you're just getting more and more options out there for you and your success. And then my last slide, which is any questions.
Cool. All right. We'll probably stop the share so that we can, come back, see both of us again. Cool. Okie dokie. So writers, as a reminder, you may have missed it in our little technical adventure, but please type your questions into the Q&A box. Sweet. So I have a question that a writer who could not attend submitted to me.
Okay.
So let's say, we've put a package together and, we're on our way to get financing and everything's going great. What happens if a piece of that package falls apart? Like we lose the actor, for example.
That's an unfortunate thing. It happens all the time. And so you kind of have to pick up the pieces, right? Okay, we lost this actor. You would need to tell the investors, maybe you have some investors that were there because of the actors, like, okay, well, we lost the actor, but can we get you to agree that if we get one of these other 5 pre-approved actors, you will still do this financing? That's a good way to like keep all the balls in the air, and then you can go to one of those 5 pre-approved actors with your financing in place, make that financial offer, and keep playing that game. So that's for that specific example. I'd say depending on what's falling out, there's different versions of how to answer that question, but specifically for an actor, that's my suggestion.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because I was like, oh, that's a great question. I forget the writer's name.
And it happens a lot with distributors and sales agents too. Like if you do a deal with a sales agent or a distributor and the movie's being packaged, but maybe you only have a director, oftentimes you will have in the deal maybe like 10 to 20 names of pre-approved actors that they're okay with. and it can be any of those names. They don't care. So yeah, so you kind of use that same thought for the investor too.
All right, cool. Let's see here. Sarita asks, when do we look for the distributor or sales agent or sales rep with the script alone or completed film?
I would say distributor, sales agent, sales rep. Not with the script alone, unless they also are producers, which many of them are. Sales agents have been forced to be hybrids, and I'd say that happens with a lot of distributors too. But it's definitely more helpful when you have a producer at the very least on board, and it's going to depend on which company you're going to. If you have a producer on board, especially one that's connected, they'll probably already have connections to a lot of those places, and they'll at least be able to start the conversation, right? I don't think you'll necessarily always get that sale off of just having a producer on board, but they may say, oh, producer, yeah, I love you. If you get one of these actors or directors attached, then we'll be on board. And that producer should say, okay, can I tell them you said that? And then again, you're layering, right?
Like, isn't that where like letters of intent come in? Like,
yeah, the thing about letters of intent is they were used like so much, and it's gotten to the point where like if people send out letters of intent, you probably know that filmmaker isn't very experienced.
Oh man,
It's more like, can I call that agent and like confirm, right? And if you can and they do, you know that it's real.
Got it. Just had to clear that up because I was like, are we still doing those?
No.
Those are out of style. Cool.
Some are, but
you heard it here first, guys. No more letters of intent. Cool. All right. So Miss Amina has a question. First of all, she went to law school, so she's like, this is so great. I love this.
Good, thank you.
And then let's see here. So with or without representation, do you have any tips on how to approach an actor's production company and bring the odds to our favor? And what common pitfalls have you seen in packaging, and what can we do as writers early on to help us best we can like avoid these pitfalls? I boggled that. She wrote that so much nicer than I did.
Okay, well, I'll answer the first question first. So going to actors, production companies, how do you set yourself up for success, right? Yeah. I would say do your research. Most actors have set out there at some point, this is the type of project I want to make, right? So if you happen to have so do your research about who has said something about wanting to do a movie about dolphins, right? Try and find that, because that's a way to maybe say, oh, here's that dolphin script you've been wanting to do. It's also, trying to play off of sometimes where they're from. I'd say a lot of actors maybe like to work from home, or they want to go back and visit their family in the UK or whatever it is, right? Like if you do your research on who that actor is that you're maybe targeting and try and tailor it towards how their experiences are, that helps. And based on IP and based on true stories, those are really big for actors right now. They care a lot about them. So, I'd say that that's also another thing where if it's like, this has some real weight behind it from an IP perspective or things like that. And I know it's not always easy to get. I totally get that. But based on a true story, because I think actors tend to like to play based on true stories, right? There's a tendency to kind of want to like show somebody for who they were and try and like recreate them versus like making it up in their head, which can be fun too. But I think the true story aspect of it, can be exciting to try and like recreate this amazing human that actually existed, or very interesting human that actually existed. I think some of the pitfalls that I've seen is first, the story's just not ready, right? I constantly have to tell clients, like, it's not ready. You are not setting yourself up for success. Make sure it is ready. You have to remember that when you're going to big actors, production companies, or others, right? They are getting things sent to them from Steven Spielberg and Jerry Bruckheimer. And so they are seeing like the best of the best. And you have to make sure you're doing everything you can to get up to the best standard to compete with that. The other pitfall I'd say is that sometimes there is you need to be patient, and you need to take notes, and you need to, and I don't mean like literally like write down notes, like you have to be willing to accept a comment that somebody gives to you about maybe a part of the script that is your favorite part and they don't like it, right? And being open to comments and being open to feedback, even if you don't agree, is uber important, because if somebody you're submitting to gets a sense that you aren't taking their notes seriously, or that you don't like any of their notes, they're going to be less inclined to work from you because they're going to think you're difficult. So I would say that that's another pitfall that I've seen a lot that you need to steer clear of is, thank you for the notes, I really appreciate them, you may not do anything about it, but put on the grateful face.
put on the grateful makeup and
yeah,
go do it. Okay, cool. So Holly asks a question that we had kind of touched on in this previous answer, but she is asking, why would true stories pitch or sell better than non-true stories?
I think that's a very good question. I don't know that I have an answer as to why, right? It just happens to be what it is right now. I think part of it is because if Joe Exotic didn't actually exist, and somebody made Joe Exotic, you would go, this is insane. Nobody would ever do any of this stuff, and it's not funny. But when you actually see Joe Exotic, it's fascinating. It's like watching a train wreck, and you can't look away, right? So I think there is something to the human element of somebody having really done some pretty interesting, amazing, or awful things that sparks more than an original story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, cool. And then we have a person who is in as anonymous. So Jill or Jack asking, so representing a writer / director at the script stage, what does the process look like if you all at Ramo Law came aboard? What do you look for when looking for somebody to represent?
It can vary. So like I'm happy if you want to reach out to me to have that discussion, because it's very dependent on like the project and how we're getting involved. My email is Tiffany, Tiffany @ramolaw.com. And then I'm happy to talk that through. It depends on kind of like, do you have a completed film? Do you have a script? And if you have a script, what do you need on it? Do you need legal? Do you only need packaging and sales? So I'd rather it's very client dependent. We could talk that through later.
Got it. Cool. And then let's see here. We have a question from Miss Holly. So does international sellability factor into your pitch / sale, or is it an add-on after domestic sales?
It's a very good question. I think it would depend on what your project is, right? I'd say the things that tend to be more global, right, are action, thriller, and maybe some horror. And that is because it can translate no matter where you're at, right? Like, you don't necessarily need to understand the dialogue to understand that somebody's punching somebody else in the face and that they're mad at each other. Whereas comedy is tends to be more nuanced. Same with dramas. So those tend to be maybe more domestic. So depending on what you're pitching, the genre-wise, I would say adjust your pitch according to like, oh, this could be and I don't know that you always need to say like what it's territory for, unless that comes up, but know it in the back of your head in case they're like, well, do you think this is something that can sell overseas? Or do you see this more as like something that is domestic, right? And anything political will always just be domestic. Don't expect that to go outside.
Makes sense. Cool. All right. So we have a question here. Probably have to sort of ballpark this, but what is an appropriate fee for distribution, legal services for a completed film?
It can vary. So this is also a hard question, and happy to talk to you after, but doing a deal, negotiating a deal with Sony, which tends to be like a 60-page agreement, versus Gravitas, which we do 30 deals with a year and have a cut through for, and we do with Sony too, but it's very, like, depending on which distributor you're dealing with, it's a very different process, and it can be less expensive or more expensive depending. So that's why I don't really have like a specific answer for you, but depending on your movie and where it could be going for and who it's going with, I could talk to you after and discuss.
Cool. Yeah. I think moral of most of these stories is don't sign any contracts without reading them through. And if you understand what you have read, please consult somebody who does.
Yeah. Like, I'm not saying you have to use us as a law firm, but, and I know lawyers can be expensive. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm okay with saying this. Like, it can be a process and feel frustrating sometimes. But you should, at the very least, make sure you know what you're getting into with a lawyer. At the very least, maybe they give a red line and flag things for you of what the issues are, because then you're walking into a deal knowing what your problems are.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. All right. So another writer had submitted a question to me prior to getting on the webinar. So I shall ask it now, if that is okay. So do you think it would be beneficial for writers to have like supplementary material in addition to their script when trying to put together a package, like maybe a proof of concept film or a lookbook, pitch deck, that kind of stuff?
Yes, that answer is definitely yes. If you have a short that you can do, and I get that that can be expensive, so not everybody can, but if you have a short that you can do that looks good, right? Some people send stuff that doesn't look good, so. But that can be helpful. I've had some clients. I have one client who's had some success with, he cuts like 2 to 3 minute trailers that get from other movies that give a vibe of what he's going for and like kind of tell the story that way. It's not perfect, but if you can't go do a short and you have the time and desire to do something like that, that at least like is kind of an almost teaser as to what you can get into. At the very least, you should have a one sheet, but if not, maybe even like a pitch deck. Mm-hmm. And the pitch deck should outline like, you know, the vibe from a visual standpoint of what you're going for. You know, each page should have like either a picture or kind of like colors on it that give the tone of what you're going for, as well as a logline synopsis, any bios on who's involved, if there's a director, the director statement, and, you know, maybe comparables. You don't have to. But just kind of, and any other kind of sales information on it. Is it based on IP? Is it something where, you know, the last movie that was like this was really perfect for the wedding market? I don't know, right? Like you can kind of play with the type of information to make it feel more sellable. And you should, yes, at the very least, in my opinion, get some sort of pitch deck together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, cool. I love it. So let's see here. Alexis has a question asking about, I don't know if we'll be able to speak to this, but Alexis, you might need to send me a follow-up because her question is pay to play still actively used in this process? Are you referring to like the WGA, you know, big agency TIFF?
Sorry, for which one?
Just is pay to play still actively used in this process?
Oh, it's like a pay or play? Yes, a pay or play is used, but that's where I really try and say, do you actually have all the financing to do that pay or play? Because the pay or play is usually like their entire fee, right? Or at least a good chunk of it. So do you actually have the money to make it worth it? In this COVID world, I'm scared of pay or plays. But my kind of middle ground that I like to try, it's varying depending on like the agents and who the actor is, but I like to try what I call a development fee, which is instead of, you know, giving that whole pay or play or a very big chunk of the pay or play, it's like, hey, we're developing this project. We'd like you to maybe like come aboard. We'll attach your name to it for 12 months to try and push it forward, whatever you agree on, right? And instead of paying you the full pay or play, without you having to like lift a finger and like worry about dates and all that kind of stuff right now, we'll pay you 25, 50, 100 grand, whatever makes the most sense right there. But it's usually significantly less than the pay or play. That can be a way where your offer is really getting to them because it involves money. It may not be as much as they want, but it's money. So,
right. Cool. And then follow up from Miss Alexis. Do you think that this might phase out post-COVID?
that play might phase out post-COVID.
Mhm.
I don't think for old school actors, no. There's some actors who do a lot of action movies. I'm sure you could guess who they are, who expect pair plays. So it's hard for me to imagine that being something that they're all of a sudden like, nah, you know. I think that maybe like up and coming younger actors need it less and less. But part of the thing is like most of those really up and coming smart actors, they're owning their own production companies. So they're inserting themselves in other ways. And so I find pair plays to be happening less and less than I did like 5-8 years ago, but they do still happen. And I think they will for certain ones.
Cool. All right. Well, guys, oh, wait. I just closed the Q&A box and the questions reappeared. Because I was like, oh, that was all they had. Nope, false alarm. Okay, cool. So Miss Amina asks, on the TV side, how often do you see show creators pitch themselves as co-showrunners and actually get away with it? I'm assuming, Amina, you mean somebody without previous showrunning experience, so not like Eric Kripke or Graham Yost or somebody like that.
If that is what you mean, it's so rare. I think that a lot of the time you have to be okay going into a TV series for your first one, knowing that like you're gonna get the worst deal you hopefully ever will, right? Which maybe is like in the writer's room or being involved, or even like sometimes being pushed back to like a consultant. But it doesn't mean that, you know, that's a stepping stone that hopefully you can build up to the next one and get to know them during that whole process. And hopefully those years and years and years that the series is on. And sometimes too, right? Like the first season, maybe if your lawyer can hopefully negotiate for you, or your first season may be like, okay, well, it's only writer in the room this time. But if it goes to season 2 or 3, you get bumped up to X, right? And then so on and so forth, so that hopefully maybe it can build up if the series has success.
All right, cool. Sweet. And then Sarita had a question. I'm going to do my best to sort of condense and summarize this, but if I get it wrong, Sarita, send us a follow-up. So she is effectively asking, so if, you know, let's say like an actor is very interested in the project and kind of wants to attach, but the writer feels that maybe you're not actually the best person to attach to this. So kind of she's wondering like, how do you know if the actor is a good attachment, like if it's actually going to help you?
That is where, like, I think probably people, I mean, I don't know if you have people at Roadmap that handle that type of thing, but people like me or sales agents are probably the best to approach for that, where they know what that actor is worth from a worldwide perspective, and based upon like what the content is and what the budget should be, if they're going to be valid for you to push it forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. All righty. Let's see here. Holly has a fun question. Have you noticed any trends to be more inclusive of gender and diversity? I think with like characters and cast.
Yeah, totally. Completely. Yes. I think the distribution side is on a slower path of that, because they're like, they're a year or two behind everybody because they don't actually get the movies till a year or two after they've been made, right? So I think they're a little behind on it. But from a creative, sorry, I think my son is trying to break in. But from a creative standpoint, they are definitely more open to diversity, looking for diverse content, trying to find, you know, unique storytellers. And even from like a staffing perspective, or managers or agents there, I've had them reach out to me being like, do you have these types of diverse people that I want to find slots for? So yeah, luckily that I'm noticing a good trend in that.
All right, awesome. I love it. All right, well, guys, I believe those were all of your questions. Emily's the Q&A box is empty, so we'll give it like a second or two in case anybody is frantically typing, but we are just about out of time. But while we're waiting for people to frantically type, maybe I can ask you, like what is like a fun success story that you've had, like maybe a script that you really liked or a writer you really liked that, you know, went on to do some great things?
Chick-fil-A is definitely one of them, but I've talked about that one enough. I'd say another one is, I found this writer who I love. His name is Justin Kalen Chen. And do you know Justin?
Oh, Justin, I
He's
love him.
amazing. I found him like 4 or 5 years ago, and he sent this script, and he like had this insane story, and I was like, "Is this guy? Should I be scared of this guy, or is like everything?" So his story, so everybody knows. So his story is basically like, "Oh yeah, you know, I was like basically, you know, kind of in this whole weird, crazy world, and I got myself out." And so he writes a lot of cool like genre thriller action scripts, and I signed him, and with like a month he got signed by an anonymous was it anonymous no, it was 360, and then now he's in like the Imagine Impact program, and he's repped by CAA because he's not WGA, so they can still rep him, and so he's just one of those like sweethearts that like I love seeing his success and like his trajectory. And I say he's the only guy I've ever seen that can wear like 9 rings at one time.
I love, yep. If you guys don't know Justin, that's a great description of him. Oh, that's amazing. All right, cool. So Alexis has sent us a great question to close out on. So she asks, while this is a good time for writers to get read by reps, would you say this is also a good time to approach top talent for attachments?
If you have the ability to reach that top talent, yes, they're looking. I think the question mark for everybody is like, first off, they can't like lock really in because they don't know when they can shoot. So you'll hear a lot of agents and managers talking about the fact like, well, there's interest, but like we can't really lock in. So the deals can be difficult to structure at the moment because of that. The other big thing is like what we don't know what SAG will or won't allow during this whole COVID trajectory and change. Like, okay, so say Georgia opens and you want to go shoot in Georgia, will SAG in fact let their SAG actors go shoot in Georgia? And if they will, what is that going to look like? Do they have to quarantine for 14 days before and after? What is that, right? So I'd say, yes, it's a good time because they're open and reading more than ever, and they're hungry more than ever because everything else is like canceled, and they're probably having more time to like try and find their passions for their projects. But I also say it's a trickier time from like literally making the deal perspective.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, that is all the time we have for today, but thank you so much, Miss Tiffany. This was lovely.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for putting up with my being computer illiterate. And I hope everybody stays safe and healthy, and good luck with everything.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, guys. Stay safe and healthy, and, you know, take care. I will see you all in the next one. All right.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.